small detail. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Jai Grace Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhakti Vrinda ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we will hear from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 1. What's this? The history of the life of Ajamila, I think, is the title of the chapter. And today, text 33. Kasyava kuta ayata kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya You Young King Siddha-sattama Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Yuyam Kim Siddha-sattama Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Yuyam Kim Siddha-sattama. Others, please. Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Yuyam Kim siddha-sattama Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Yuyam Kim siddha-sattama Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Yuyam Kim siddha-sattama Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Yuyam Kim siddha-sattama Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Yuyam Kim siddha-sattama Ladies? Kasyava kuta ayata Kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadevaya Synonyms. Kasya, whose servants. Va, or. Kuta, from where. Ayata, have you come. Kasmat, what is the reason. Asya, the taking away of this Ajamila. Nishedhata, are you forbidding. Kim, whether. Deva, demigods. Upadeva, some sub-demigods. Ya, who. Yuyam, all of you. Kim, whether. Siddha-sattama, the best of the perfect beings, the pure devotees. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Dear sirs, whose servants are you? Where have you come from? And why are you forbidding us to touch the body of Ajamila? Are you demigods from the heavenly planets? Are you sub-demigods? Or are you the best of devotees? Responsively, please. Dear sirs, whose servants are you? Where have you come from? And why are you forbidding us to touch the body of Ajamila? Are you demigods from the heavenly planets? Are you sub-demigods? Or are you the best of devotees? Srila Prabhupada's purport. The most significant word used in this verse is siddha-sattama, which means the best of the perfect. In Bhagavad Gita it is said, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye. Out of millions of persons, one may try to become siddha, perfect, or in other words, self-realized. A self-realized person knows that he is not the body, but a spiritual soul, aham brahmasmi. At the present moment, practically everyone is unaware of this fact, but one who understands this has attained perfection and is therefore called siddha. When one understands that the soul is part and parcel of the Supreme Soul, and one thus engages in the devotional service of the Supreme Soul, one becomes siddha-sattama. One is then eligible to live in the Vaikuntha planets or Krishna Loka. The word siddha-sattama therefore refers to a liberated, pure devotee. Since the Yamadutas are servants of Yamarāja, who is also one of the siddha-sattamas, they knew that a siddha-sattama is above the demigods and sub-demigods, and indeed above all the living entities within this material world. The Yamadutas therefore inquired why the Viṣṇudūtas were present where a sinful man was going to die. It should also be noted that Ajamila was not yet dead, for the Yamadutas were trying to snatch the soul from his heart. They could not take the soul, however, and therefore Ajamila was not yet dead. This will be revealed in later verses. Ajamila was simply in an unconscious state when the argument was in progress between the Yamadutas and the Viṣṇudūtas. The conclusion of the argument was to be a decision regarding who would claim the soul of Ajamila. Om Ajnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim Jatkripatamahang bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhobhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Kasyava kute ayata kasmadasya nishedhata King Deva Upadeva Ya Yuyam King Siddha-sattama. Dear sirs, whose servants are you? Where have you come from? And why are you forbidding us to touch the body of Ajamila? Are you demigods from the heavenly planets? Or are you sub-demigods? Or are you the best of devotees? So as we've been discussing over the last few days, and this came up because I think on a couple of times I said something about Ajamila drawing his last breath, so therefore he must be dead. But this is like the in-between part, you know, so sort of the tata. And so they hadn't actually, as Prabhupada points out in his purport to today's verse, the Yamadutas hadn't yet succeeded in removing Ajamila's soul, in other words, his consciousness, from his body. So he's there, and there's this whole argument that's going to go. And this is really a setup for an extended argument between the Yamadutas and the Viṣṇudūtas. And what we see next is that the Yamadutas are going to present their argument. And their argument is based in Scripture. It's based in the instruction of their master, who's one of the 12 Mahajanas. And it's very sound to an extent. Just as we see at the end of the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna makes a very dharmic argument for his abstaining from participating in the battle, in this war. He tells Krishna, "I'm not going to do it. Can't do it." And drops his bow and his quiver on the ground, and he's just there, I can't do it. And he's made this very apparently nice argument, which Krishna dismisses quite facilely. Says, oh, yeah, it sounds nice, but let's take a look at the context here and see if there are some other considerations. So then he actually just smashes. He says, actually, it's a foolish argument, if you actually have a broader perspective. So here, the Yamadutas are arguing in favor of what I sometimes refer to as conventional dharma, which Krishna tells us at the end of the Bhagavad Gita to reject, right? Right. Wrong. Completely reject, right? Sarva dharman parityajya. Just flush it, get rid of it. Don't need it. Oh, Krishna's mercy has come. Okay, this will probably help keep me from saying anything wrong. Receiving some of Krishna's mercy. Thank you. So here, for the rest of this chapter, we're going to hear there's a little back and forth between the Yamadutas and the Viṣṇudūtas, but mostly it's going to be the Yamadutas presenting their very dharmic. This is a sinful man. He grew up in a nice family, but the way he's behaved for the last, whatever it's been, 70 some odd years, maybe close to 80 years, has really just been awful. He's just done awful, he's done awful things. He he started off by misspending the inheritance from his father on a woman who wasn't really worthy of his attention. And he spent his whole life, raising this family. What did he have, 8 kids, 10 kids? And he's 88 and he's got this...
He was already married to a very saintly lady.
Oh, that's right, yeah. So, I mean, he's the guy, the guy's a loser. And here he is, he's 88. He's 88 and he's got a kid. I mean, it's not even a teenage kid. It's not even like a preteen kid. It's a baby. Narayan's a baby, or at best a toddler. And so this is a guy who apparently hasn't figured out how this happens or something. But because of those previous sanskars, as we heard last week, he's constantly, the whole time this child's been alive, because he was open to that dictation from the super soul. He was able to name this child Narayana. So he's chanting Narayana, Narayana the whole time. Oh, look, Narayan's taking his first steps. Oh, come here, have some of my doll. Oh, have a lollipop, whatever, just Narayana, constant chanting of Narayana. So what we see here in these chapters is Srimad Bhagavatam doing what it does so frequently. Probably at least once in every chapter. We have, in every canto, we have several narratives in each canto, and each of these narratives draws, as I've pointed out, a very bright line between bhakti and absolutely everything else. And so this is, yes, Maitreya, a leitmotif that I see in Srimad Bhagavatam, a recurring pattern, that bhakti overcomes everything. Where's my verse? This is a verse I thought I had memorized. This is a verse from something that Srila Jiva Goswami refers to as the Matara Shruti. Because of its name, I can only assume that it's from one of the Vedas. I have not been able to trace out where it's from. The only citation that I see is Matara Shruti, and the original citation that I found is in Srila Jiva Goswami's Priti Sandarbha. So he's kind of like at the very beginning of the Priti Sandarbha. Just a little quick background. As most of us are aware, Jiva Goswami composed 6 what he called sandarbhas, 6 extended essays, presenting the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam as we hear from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so we start with the Tattva Sandarbha, which establishes, with rather extended argument, establishes the ultimate pramana, the ultimate evidence for understanding spiritual knowledge, and that's Srimad Bhagavatam. And then the Paramatma Sandarbha, which discusses not just the Paramatma, not just the Paramatma Tattva, but also Jiva Tattva and Maya Tattva. And so these are becoming progressively refined. And then the Bhagavat Sandarbha, which establishes that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually the origin of the Paramatma. And then the Krishna Sandarbha, which establishes that, as the Bhagavatam says in its Paribhasha Sutra, Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam. Out of all the forms of the Godhead, Krishna is the original, supreme personality of Godhead. Kind of the motto of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, one of Srila Prabhupada's favorite phrases. Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. And then, so those 4 sandarbhas all establish one of the 3 broad tattvas, 3 broad categories of transcendental knowledge, which is Sambandha Gyan, the relationships I was going to say the relationship between the Lord and the jivas, but in the Paramatma Sandarbha, we see that it also discusses the relationships among the jiva, the Paramatma, and the material energy as well. And then there's the fifth is the Bhakti Sandarbha, which discusses bhakti as a practice, not as a concept. So it establishes, where's the Abhideya Tattva, the practice by which the relationship between the living entities and the Lord becomes realized, becomes activated. And then the Priti Sandarbha, Priti means love or affection. And so this establishes Prayojana Tattva, the goal, the ultimate goal of bhakti. So early on, Jiva Goswami cites this verse from the Mathura Shruti, Bhaktirevainam nayati, Bhaktirevainam darshayati, Bhakti Vasha Purusho, Bhaktireva bhuyasi. Bhakti alone brings us near to the Lord. Bhakti alone enables us to see the Lord, shows us the Lord. And bhakti alone can control the Lord. Therefore, bhakti is the greatest power of all. So the argument that's going to ensue here will be, first of all, the Yamadutas presenting their understanding of conventional dharma as they've learned it, the way things are supposed to be in the world. This is a sinful guy. He's done this, and that. We've got the guy's record. We've got his rap sheets. And what are you doing here? What business do you have here? This is our guy. And then that'll be countered by the Yamadutas explaining in some detail what we heard in brief last week, and that is that the chanting of the holy names as the core anga of sadhana bhakti is more powerful than anything. We took a quick look at the last verse of the Bhagavatam the other day, which says, offers its obeisances to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the chanting of whose holy names is able to destroy all kinds of sin. So we're going to see this we're going to see how this very bright line is drawn in the Bhagavatam over and over again between bhakti and absolutely everything else. So this is my excuse to go back to the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, a couple of my favorite verses. Well, maybe a couple of my favorite verses, at least in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto. And that's texts 17 and 19, which I think work really powerfully together to draw that bright line. So the context again is Vyasadeva is dejected, he's depressed, he's completely bummed out because he's done all this work, but still he feels something's missing and he just can't put his finger on it. So Narada Muni has come here to tell him what's what. He's come here to help his disciple out, give him a little boost, a little nudge, a little tug. Here's what you need to do. And he tells him, anybody remember, other than Dravida, remember the word from the other day that with which Narada Muni describes everything Vyasadeva has done up to this point? Jugupsitam. Disgusting. Detestable. What? It's the Vedas. It's meant for the upliftment of all humankind. But he's making a comparison. Again, he's drawing that line because we see the Vedas, sometimes they can be a jungle of sound. And I was going to say Bonies again, dating myself. I walked down to Sprouts yesterday, and I walked past that tavern on the corner there, and the din from that place was just on the sidewalk. Was just maddening, and I thought, especially if someone whose hearing is screwy as mine were in there, I wouldn't be able to hear a darn word anybody said to me. And I mean, it's just, but this is what people are doing on a nice Sunday afternoon. They're not even watching the stupid game on the TV sets. You know, they're drinking their whatever and talking all kinds of nonsense. And they're all trying really hard to shout over each other. And the din was just maddening, just walking by. And I thought, man, if I were inside, I would run out of there, because it's hard, it's hard enough, as screwy as my hearing is nowadays, but poof, in there, crazy. And so the Vedas can be like that if we don't have, the proper guidance to help us understand that there's something here. Even we have Puranas that, that tell us Shiva is supreme, Brahma is supreme, Durga is supreme, because they're meant for strengthening the faith of the people for whom that particular Purana is the audience. But we see a completely different audience in the Srimad Bhagavatam. We see that presented right in the second verse. Right? Dharma prodchita kaitavatra paramo nirmatsaranam satam. The satam. Those who are pure in heart. How pure in heart? Completely free from envy. How are they free from envy? Because they've completely rejected this whole dog-eat-dog game of the material world. Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport, not only are they not jockeying for position in the material world, but they strive to create a competition-less society with God at the center. Who had ever heard of such a thing? I hadn't. When I read that back at the end of 1969 or early 1970, I just thought, this is it. This is the revolution we're looking for. Here it is. Sign me up. So this, and the Bhagavatam itself describes itself as a completely different creation. It's not like anything else. It's not like any of the other Puranas even. Completely different audience. The satam. So here we have the sattamas, right? How do the Yamadutas describe it? Siddha-sattama, the very best of the perfected pure devotees. I mean, this is a very refined group of people. These Viṣṇudūtas, they're Vaikuntavasis essentially, right? They got a job escorting those who are ready for Vaikuntha Loka back to the Vaikuntha planets. So they're wondering, what's the deal? So here, Ajamila is on the verge of his getting his second chance at living his life the way it was intended to be, so that he can get the result that was intended by his conception and birth, by his good parents. So so we see text 17 of the 5th chapter. This is, Srila Prabhupada apparently cited this verse more frequently than text 19, because it's a little more familiar to devotees, and you hear devotees cite it a lot. So, Tyaktva swadharmam charanam bhujam harer bhajanna pakvo tapatit jato yadi yatrakva babhadram abhuda mushyaking ko varta apto bhajatam swadharmataha. So, here Narada Muni is instructing him, his disciple Vyasadeva, in the stark difference between bhakti and everything else. So he says, one who has forsaken his material occupations to engage in the devotional service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in an immature stage. Yet there's no danger of his being unsuccessful. I mean, we hear this in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, right? In this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution. And he's drawing, in there, Krishna is drawing a distinction between bhakti, between surrendering to him, and everything else. And then when he gets to the end of the Gita, he says, okay, so we've talked about all this other stuff, now forget it. And just surrender to me. Yet there's no danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. And we heard that back in the first, early in the first chapter, second chapter of the Bhagavatam. That without that touch of bhakti, even varnashram dharma is just a waste of time. Because first of all, whether it's karma, siddhi, or jnana you're looking for, if you don't do it perfectly, you don't get the right result. Right? We see that elsewhere in the sixth. We'll see that later, I think, in the sixth canto, yeah? With Tushta and Vikrasura. Wrong emphasis. One syllable off. Wrong emphasis, literally. Blew up in his face, right? The whole thing just kind of blew up in his face. Fortunately, because Dharma is one of our foremost purohits in our society, because his yagyas are all about bhakti. He makes bhakti the focus of them. That's not a danger there. But if you're about karma, right? We haven't had any blow up in your face yet, right? Yet. So, just like one syllable off and the whole thing went just completely wrong. And of course, although it may be presented differently in different Puranas, in the Bhagavad Purana, who's the hero of that pastime? The demon, because he's a pure devotee. And we hear about his glories, and he's even telling Indra, dude, you got to kill me. No, wait, you're a devotee. That's cool, but this is the way the story plays out. You got to kill me because I'm a demon. So he's giving Indra this wonderful instruction. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, fully doing his dharma perfectly, still he doesn't gain anything. Because we know that even if he attains svarga, then when the credit runs out, kshine punyamachalokam vishanti, back down to this, apparently bad deal of a planet. So then, oh dear, it's just not going to work. Okay. So then in text 19, a couple verses later, Narada says, Navai janujatu katancana vrajan mukunda sevyanvayad anga sangshritam smaran mukundangari upaguhanam punar vihatu michen narasagraho janaha. He says, my dear Vyas, even though a devotee of Lord Krishna sometimes falls down somehow or other, he certainly does not undergo material existence like others, the fruit of workers, etc. Because a person who has once relished the taste of the lotus feet of the Lord, and it's even more specific than that. It's Mukunda Seva, Smaran Mukunda, Mukundangri Sevanam. It's the service of the Lord's lotus feet. Licking the Lord's lotus feet, right? The taste, literal taste of the Lord's lotus feet. Because a person who has once relished the taste of the Lord's lotus feet can do nothing but remember that ecstasy again and again. And the operative phrase here, well, along with licking the Lord's lotus feet, is rasagraha. So I want to focus on that. So because time is short, I can't read all of Srila Prabhupada's purport because I also want to share Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's, which is very powerfully graphic, or graphically powerful. Both. Graphically, powerfully amazing. Prabhupada's purport is wonderful. It was one of my favorite purports when I had only the first canto, and it was called to our attention by one devotee who was a leader in our society at the time, especially in this part of the world and Hawaii. And when some devotees were complaining about some leaders who had left, and it kept referring to them as ex-devotees. This was Rameshwar Prabhu. And so we were having a meeting in the hut where he would stay when he came to Honolulu. And he looked at me and he says, Babu, get down the first volume of the first canto. Open it to chapter 5, text 19. Read the verse, read the purport. And here, Srila Prabhupada makes this point that there's no such thing as an ex-devotee. There is no such thing as an ex-devotee because they're rasagraha. So Srila Prabhupada says, there are certainly many instances where devotees of the Lord have fallen down to the uncongenial association, just like fruitive workers who are always prone to degradation. But even though he falls down, a devotee is never to be considered the same as a fallen karmi. A karmi suffers the result of his own fruitive reactions, whereas a devotee is reformed by chastisement directed by the Lord himself. And then he goes on to talk about how if a neophyte devotee falls down and they don't get that nice birth in a family of transcendentalists or rich mercantile family or whatever, but really get dragged over the coals in this lifetime, that's even better, because they become rectified just in this lifetime. They don't have to. It's not the scenic route, right? It's not the scenic route. It's direct. It's Krishna, and Srila, we can see when we look at Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's Tika on this verse, you can see where Srila Prabhupada bases his purport in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. But Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary is it draws that line so brightly. So he says, this verse elaborates the point that there is no misfortune for the devotee, even if overcome because of poor determination. Srila Prabhupada says uncongenial association, and elsewhere bad association in his purport. Vishwanath Chakravarti says poor determination. I think they kind of go hand in hand. When our determination weakens, we may find ourselves in less congenial, less supportive association. Many of us have this experience. Even if overcome because of poor determination, a person who serves Mukunda never returns to samsara, the place for enjoying the results of karma, whereas those practicing karma do return. That is because he does not experience happiness and distress from karmas, since he experiences only the fruit of happiness and distress directly given by the Lord. And then he cites a verse from, I think, first the Prayers by the Personified Vedas, chapter 87 of the 10th canto. When a person realizes you, he no longer cares about his good and bad fortune arising from past pious and sinful acts, since it is you alone who control his good and bad fortune. And then, karma bandhanam janma, na karma bandhanam janma, Vaishnavanam cha vidyate. The Vaishnavas do not have rebirth, caused by karma. This is from a line from the Padma Purana. It's a line from the Padma Purana. Vaishnavas do not have rebirth caused by karma. It's caused by bhakti. They take birth, again, to engage further in bhakti, to further refine their bhakti. And he continues, remembering from previous practice alone the mental embrace, upaguhanam, of the Lord's lotus feet, he has no desire to give that up. The verse does not say remembering his lotus feet, like Jiva Goswami. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is occasionally inclined to get into the grammatical weeds just to really make things clear. The verse does not say remembering his lotus feet, rather remembering the embrace of his lotus feet. And the word again is used. The implication of these two words is that even though he may give up by his own choice the worship once, twice, or 3 times because of poor determination, after some time, by remembering his previous state of bliss from remembering the Lord, and also remembering his present state of distress from not remembering the Lord, he repents. Oh, what have I foolishly done? Let that be. I will not again abandon the worship of the Lord. He again begins worshiping the Lord. The verse also uses the phrase, this is time when I advise the devotees, if you haven't already, buckle your seatbelts. Because it gets really cool from here. The verse also uses the phrase, does not desire to give up, instead of does not give up. This implies that he desires that he be devoid of pride in his practice. I'm not going anywhere. The Lord's bringing me somewhere. This isn't happening by my own. We had the two fingers, right? Endeavor and grace. Mother Yashoda made the endeavor to the point where the flowers are falling, or her hair's becoming undone, the jewelry's falling, and she's sweating. And Krishna says, okay, cool. Enough. We've braided all the neighbors' ropes, so I'll let her bind me. But it's not her endeavor, it's her priti, her love, that's forcing the Lord to yield to her. And then he says, so the accomplishment, the devotee's success, becoming a siddha-sattama, is in the hands of the Lord. The cause of not desiring to give up is then mentioned. Rasagraha means one, your seatbelts are buckled, right? Firmly? Okay, gotcha. Rasagraha means one who is eager for tasting, or one who has a taste which is something like a ghost which cannot be given up, haunted by rasa. And then he poses a doubt, a samshaya. The meaning is then that worship after stages of nishta, ruchi, and asakti becomes actual rasa at the stage of rati, at bhava. However, kintu, not just two, but kintu, however, the strong kind. Even from the first day of worshiping the Lord, there is certainly a portion of tasting rasa in a very covered form. Thus it is said, Bhakti pareshana bhavo viraktiranyatra chaishatri eka kalaha prapadyamanasa yatashnata tushti pushti kshudapaya nukasam. So this is a verse. Do you have them all straight, the Navyogendras straight? Is this Havi or Kavi? Do you remember? I always have to look. It's the first one. Havi. Havi or it's Havi or Havi?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So here, this sage, one of King Rishabhadev's 100 sons, is analogizing engaging in sadhana bhakti with eating a meal. And he says 3 things happen simultaneously and progressively as we engage in devotional service. Bhakti, pareshano bhavo, and viraktiranyatra. So a sense of devotion, that's there in the activity, and then some direct experience of the Lord. And Viṣṇudūtas saying that happens from the very first day of worshiping the Lord. So sometimes, we get into our japa, or someone turns us on to gulab jamans for the first time. Or we get some of that maha burfi that I had yesterday. And you go, wow, this is not like anything I've ever experienced. Or a really good kirtan. Or somebody gives like a real, like super on-point class that just really sticks with you all day, haunts you all day, right? Those 3 things happen simultaneously and progressively as we engage in bhakti. Just as when we're eating a meal, 3 things happen simultaneously and progressively as we eat. Tushti, pushti, kshudapaya. Pleasure, nourishment, and relief from hunger. And these 3 things are analogous. We get some pleasure from that engaging in bhakti. We get nourishment by that direct experience of the Lord, and we get detachment from everything else as those things increase. Our detachment grows, our detachment from other things naturally grows. We have that higher taste. We are rasagraha. Just as when we eat, there's some pleasure from the first morsel. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points that out in his commentary on this verse. It happens, the pleasure, the nourishment, and the relief from hunger begin with that first morsel. And they progress, they grow. And then he says, as with any analogy, there's a flaw, a little fly in the ointment. You can't keep eating forever, but you can keep serving forever. So he makes this point that even from the very beginning of our practice, and in the Bhakti Sandarbha, he actually argues, although he says something a little different in his commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, but he says that even sadhana bhakti, even beginner bhakti, must have some, and he argues with 6.5 verses, I think, from the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavatam, that based on these 6.5 verses, even sadhana bhakti must have some power to control the Lord. Otherwise, how is it that he would award bhava bhakti to the devotees? So this bhakti is so powerful that its effects take place from the very beginning of the practice, and we don't have to do it perfectly. We have to do all the other things, karma, jnana, yoga. We have to do those perfectly to get the results. And this is not something you're going to find if you go down. There used to be a health club that I went to down on the boardwalk in Mission Beach. Can't remember what the name of it was. Oh, Frogs or something like that. Anyway, I went to some yoga classes there, and I thought, you'll never hear what the Yoga Sutra says you have to do to actually gain the perfection of yoga. First of all, you won't hear Ishvara Pranidhana, which is, we find in the second part of the Yoga Sutras, is an essential element of yoga practice. And that is submission to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Ishvara. But you also won't hear there that you got to be celibate. Ain't going to happen. You know, we're there to show off our Lululemons or something, you know, to stretch and look great doing it. So you have to do those things, all those things perfectly. But when you're engaged in bhakti, there's no more danger of failing than there is. Well, he says, you know, the Bhagavatam says, I think it's in the 11th canto, that even if running with your eyes, like running with your eyes closed, you're not going to fall down, because bhakti is that powerful. Yeah, it's right there. Yeah, this is still so bhakti is completely apart from everything else, and that's the gift that Srila Prabhupada brought us, as unlikely as it might have seemed. You know, even his godbrothers are wondering, well, what's he doing there? You know, there's nothing to eat there. There's nobody to associate with there. And then we see when Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter, one of the letters to his godbrother's, Keshava Maharaj's disciple, Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, he wrote it on ISKCON letterhead, and it had the names of the directors of ISKCON. All, you know, their civil names. And Srila Prabhupada wrote in the margin, these people are all duly initiated Vaishnavas, and they have Vaishnava names, and they follow Vaishnava Sadachar. They follow Vaishnava practice. They're engaged in sadhana bhakti. That's what I'm doing here. So that's what Srila Prabhupada came to give us. So that's why we study Srimad Bhagavatam every day. This is one of the, and if we study it under the proper guidance, then everything here is purifying. Even the rasa dance, we're warned so many times, don't go there. But at the end of those 5 chapters, King Parikit's a little confused. Well, he's clearing things up for us. He's not confused so much, but he's clearing things up for us. I don't get it. He refers to the Lord as Dharma Setu, kind of like the bridge to Dharma, the source of Dharma, but he's doing this strange stuff in the middle of night with unmarried ladies and other men's wives. I don't get it. How's that? That doesn't sound very dharmic to me. And Shukadeva Goswami points out, you don't really get it. What you need to understand is that these pastimes of Vishnu, and who else could do this but Vishnu, right? Dance individually according to her own individual taste with each of the countless gopis. These are the pastimes of Vishnu, and if we hear them properly, if we hear them with faith from the proper source, that this will rip out the real disease of the heart, hridroga, the real heart disease that we're suffering from, which is lust. Rip it out by the roots. Bhakti is that powerful. This is one of those 5 most powerful angas of bhakti, and I'm in big trouble. I'll stop here and entertain any discussion. Thank you.
Recently, I'm at the point now where I have to rememorize verses that I memorized long ago and practically forgot. So there's a verse at the end of the chapter 4 of the 12th canto.
Oh.
And this chapter deals with all kinds of annihilations. It's pretty sobering. One of those annihilations is our own personal death, and the others are, various stages of the annihilation of the universe. But then at the end, he has this verse, the Shukadev speaking in Purigam, he says, Sangsara sindham ati dusta namuti tirshor, nanyak plavo bhagavatak purushottamasya, lila kata vasani sevanam antarena, pungso bhaved vivada dukkha dabadi tasya. Which means, he uses both the analogy of the forest fire and the ocean in the same verse to describe this material world. So he calls it Sangsara Sindham, that's the ocean of samsara. Adi Dustaram, very difficult to cross over. But those who are really eager to cross over, there's only one boat. There's only one boat that'll work. And that is, says, Lila Katavasani Shevanam, the cultivation of the taste for hearing the pastimes of Hari, of Krishna. And then he says, Vivada dukkha dabadi dasya, in this ocean, which is like a forest fire full of blazing fire-like dangers. So now, the reason I'm asking this is that at the very beginning of Bhagavatam, 2nd verse, he says he kicked out all cheating dharmas, kaitava dharma. And one of which is, as Sri Yamarāja says, and you pointed out, is the desire for liberation, even that. But here, right at the end of the Bhagavatam, he's encouraging his readers to cultivate the taste for the Krishna's Leela, so that you'll be able to get liberation from the dangers of this world. So how does this work? And that's through the Bhagavatam we find many instances where, it's like, this will help you get free, from the miseries of this material world.
Excellent question. As to be expected, essential question. Yeah, that's a good point, because this comes up throughout the Bhagavatam, but what we find throughout the Bhagavatam is that the real liberation is engagement in, in the Lord's service, and that's the ultimate liberation. The other kinds of liberation, well, especially the Sayuja Mukti, not at all desirable by devotees. And the others, the devotees will accept them, but they'll accept them only if there's an opportunity for service. And they do afford some opportunity for salokya, living on the same planet of the Lord. Well, if you're in the same room, then there's going to be an opportunity for service, right? So we see that distinction drawn throughout the Bhagavatam, that we're talking about the ultimate liberation. However, I think it was it in this chapter or was it in Denver? Given so many classes lately, that distinction is drawn, and now as I'm grasping for it, the instruction that I'm looking for seems to become progressively elusive. But that's a point that's made, is that that real liberation means engagement. And we see this at the beginning of the 10th canto. It's not really real liberation, because what's missing is that essential element, that dharma of the jiva, which is service to Krishna. That's one of the things that's described about the jiva in the Paramatma Sandarbha, is that its essential nature, our essential nature, is service to Krishna. So there are varieties and levels of liberation, and the ultimate liberation is engagement in the Lord's service.
I
Maharaj, I have an idea, maybe not completely
Please.
articulated, and that is like, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshana Dasha. Chapter 13, this is part of the central part of knowledge, to remember, understand the evils, the horrible pains because of birth, old age, disease, and death. And how many times did Prabhupada use that in his preaching, the threefold miseries? And so that can be an impetus. It should be an impetus for taking up devotional service. And so I want to get liberated. I want to go back to Godhead. I want to get free of all these miseries. So then if that, you become a serious chanter. But as you progress in devotional service, your desire evolves. Until
exactly.
so that it's almost like a change-up. Well, look, do you like birth, old age, disease, and death? No. Well, first of all, understand you're not this body, and then you're going to have millions and millions of bodies. So you want to get rid of it? Chant this mantra, And so you take up the process of devotional service. But if you become, as you go on with it, your material desires decrease, as you explain there so beautifully quoted in that verse. And one of those material desires is to be free from the miseries. And it's completely replaced by the desire just to relish the taste of Krishna's lotus feet through devotional service, to the point where nadanam nasundarim and like that. So it's kind of an evolution.
Perfect. Thank you. Something else?
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for the nice class. I liked how you brought up the point of there is no ex-devotee. So I've met different devotees they're no longer able to come to temples anymore, maybe because of some past mistake they've made. So how do we understand, like Krishna is saying that someone who commits the most abominable activity, if they continue with devotional service, they'll be rectified, they'll be purified. There's all these verses saying how any small endeavor is never lost, and you hear about devotees not being able to come to temples because of some small fall down, even maybe not even that serious. How are they supposed to be rectified? When is the activity too sinful, too bad? Like, who's to say? Like, what is Krishna referring to when he says the most abominable activity, for example? Like,
yeah, that's.
Sorry, I don't know how to.
Yeah, no, it's a natural question, and as you were thinking, I'm starting to think of different devotees who are excluded from attending the temple for different reasons, and so it's a little. I don't want to overgeneralize, but what makes verse 30 work, what helps us see that verse 30 doesn't act as an excuse for a devotee's misbehavior, is that because that devotee's real focus is Krishna, and they're not distracted by worshiping the demigods to go to Svarga, engaging in yoga to get some siddhis or whatever. But because Krishna is their sole focus, they don't have to do it perfectly, but still, Krishna says they are to be considered saintly. Why? Because of bhakti. They'll be rectified by their continued engagement in bhakti. Now, sometimes they might do something or find themselves in a situation that makes their close association with some devotees not desirable for some reasons. I don't want to. I'm thinking of examples, and I don't really want to mention them. And so sometimes they're excluded simply because of the nature of their particular offense. Might create some disruption. in the company of devotees. That's, one instance for one reason or another. So they continue to practice, and I know devotees who are like that. They're not allowed to come to the temple. They're not happy about it, but they understand. I did something, and so this apparently is part of the deal. And I'm going to keep chanting. I'm going to keep studying the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm going to keep associating with those devotees who don't mind my company, and they'll continue to encourage me. And so they appreciate that. And that keeps their progress, that keeps their path of progress open. If they become nasty and lash out, and think, well, they're not real devotees because they rejected me, and it was a minor fall down, and it was some years ago, and I paid my debt to society, or I whatever, been through therapy, whatever it is, and I'm cool now. Well, if they're thinking I'm cool now, that would be an indication that they're not, especially if it causes them, to criticize the devotees who want them to maintain some distance, from a community. So it's the bhakti, it's the continued bhakti that'll rectify them. It's their staying in the shower, right? So, and we see that, we see that their sincerity manifested in their, in their continued practice, and they're doubling down and tripling down on their practice even. And so, their success is assured. Their success is assured. And, they can be considered saintly, but some of us, may want to keep our distance for one reason or another. Or we may want to keep them distant from the community for some reason or another. If I went further than that, then it would be political or something. And I don't intend to go there. My attention was called this morning to some disturbance among a group of devotees that I'm familiar with, and it just reminded me of Vrindavan Das Thakur's admonition 4 times in Chaitanya Bhagavat. Don't take sides when there's a dispute between devotees. Just don't do it. Now the examples, they all come up in when there's those mock fights between Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu. But the admonition isn't, among supreme personalities of Godhead, but it's among Vaishnavas. If there's a disagreement between a couple of Vaishnavas, don't take sides. It'll ruin you. So I saw that and I just thought, okay. Good thing I haven't said a word about this, and I'm throwing away the key. Does that help at all? It's a tricky, it's a tricky thing, because we want, on the one hand, our business is creating faith where there is none, encouraging faith where we find it. That's our only business as devotees. But sometimes that how we do it, there are nuances, subtleties to how we do it, how we apply that in particular instances. Anything on the interwebs before the hook comes?